Monday evening. The studio lights blazed. Cameras rolled. Everything was set for another combative political face-off. Candace Owens sat poised sharp, unshaken, and ready to go for the kill. Her earpiece buzzed faintly as she adjusted it with her usual confidence. Across from her, seated calmly and almost too quietly, was someone the American audience barely knew. President Ibrahim Traoré. It was his first major interview on American television, and no one, absolutely no one, expected it to be friendly. Candace leaned forward. "Let's talk facts," she began. Her voice precise, polished, and perfectly rehearsed. "You lead a transitional government. Many in the West say that's unstable. Isn't your people's hope just another illusion?" The air tightened. This was the moment producers had been waiting for, the spark, the clash. But Traoré didn't bite. He didn't blink. He smiled, gently. And then came his reply, quiet, disarming, devastating. "Illusion, don't bury children." Silence. Not the dramatic, made-for-television kind. The heavy, soul-freezing kind. Candace's mouth parted slightly, unsure whether to counter or pause. But Traoré wasn't done. His voice remained soft, but something behind it carried weight. "Sorrow. Truth. My people," he said, "don't speak in headlines. They speak in hunger. In walking 10 kilometers just to find water, in holding on to hope with blistered hands." And just like that, the tone shifted. In the control room, a director turned to his crew, mouthing silently, "What's happening?" This wasn't going according to plan. There was no argument, no sparks, no viral takedowns. Candace sat straighter in her chair, her composure intact, but the edge in her voice dulled just a bit. He wasn't being political. He was being personal. Something about that unnerved her. But she didn't show it. Not yet. 10 minutes in, the interview was already becoming something else. Something no producer had written. No network had expected. She came prepared to confront a politician. But what sat across from her was not a politician in performance. It was a man with grief in his pocket. And America was about to find out why. The next question wasn't meant to be memorable. It was just part of the format. A routine filler. Something to soften the pace before the next round of confrontation. Candace Owens tilted her head slightly and asked, "What keeps you up at night, Mr. President?" She expected something political. An answer about foreign aid, terrorism, maybe economic uncertainty. Something broad and safe. But Ibrahim Traoré posed. For the first time, he looked down. Not in shame, but in memory. When he looked up again, his eyes weren't searching for the audience or the camera. They were searching for someone else. "A boy named Suleen," he said. Candace furrowed her brow. "Who is that?" "He was 6. We met in the countryside," Traoré replied. "He asked me for a pencil." "A pencil," she repeated. Caught off guard. He wanted to draw what happiness looked like. But he didn't have paper. He didn't even have a home. The silence hit like thunder. Candace reached for her notes. And then missed. Her fingers trembled slightly, almost imperceptibly, but the cameras caught it. Traoré continued. "I told him I'd come back. With books, with a school. I made a promise." He stopped. Candace leaned forward. "Not as a journalist now, but as a human being. And when I returned, he was already gone. He didn't need to say the word, but he did anyway. Malaria. The breath left the room. Candace's voice cracked. Barely audible. I've never heard this before. Her hands rested in her lap. Her armor was cracking. Not from debate, but from something deeper. Something raw. Something she couldn't argue with. Loss. And in that moment, something irreversible happened. The interview stopped being about policy. It became a confession. A revelation. A funeral for a promise never kept. Candace blinked. Eyes glassy. Unsure where to go next. But Traoré wasn't looking for sympathy. It's not pity I want, he said softly. It's memory. The lights were still on. The camera's still rolling, but the illusion of control was long gone. This wasn't television. This was truth unfiltered. Uncomfortable. And completely real. And millions watching felt it. Candace tried to regain her footing. You're a president, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. You can't carry every child. Traoré nodded. Not defensive. Just honest. I know, he replied. But I remember their names anyway. The control room froze. The producers had stopped switching camera angles. One whispered into the mic, just let it breathe. Candace leaned in not to challenge, but to understand. Her tone had changed. It wasn't debate anymore. It was something else. Why do you carry all of that? She asked softly. Traoré didn't hesitate. Because leadership without pain is just performance. And I didn't come here to perform. That line hit harder than any argument could. Doctors in break rooms. Teachers in classrooms. Mothers in kitchens. Millions watching suddenly leaned in. No one expected this. Not from her. Not from him. Candace blinked rapidly, her fingers brushing the corner of her eye. She didn't want to cry. She was known for control. But something in his voice, something about that boy, broke through. She took a breath, then asked a question the producers didn't prep for. You said you remember the names. Is that really true? Traoré reached slowly into his jacket. No theatrics. No drama. He pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. Worn. Creased. Nearly falling apart. Candace's eyes followed every movement. He unfolded it gently, as if touching a relic. This is Celine, he said. He gave me a drawing the day we met. I've carried it ever since. He turned it around. A simple sketch. A stick figure house. 2 figures holding hands. Above it, in shaky child handwriting, Moi et le président. Candace covered her mouth. You still carry it, she whispered. Voice cracking. I carry many, he said softly. But this one reminds me why I can't afford to forget. The camera zoomed in. No one called for it. It just happened. Viewers saw it clearly faded pencil lines. Childish shapes. Hope on a torn piece of paper. And suddenly, people everywhere began to cry. Because it wasn't about politics anymore. It was about a boy who drew a future. And a man who carried that future in his coat. Candace didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any monologue. Across phones and screens, hearts were breaking. Not from sadness, but from truth. Unpolished. Undeniable. The studio had gone quiet, so quiet. You could hear the hum of the lights, Candace Owens sat frozen, her notes untouched, her thoughts unraveling. She had entered the room ready for a televised clash, but what she got was a confession draped in heartbreak. Traoré sat across from her, not with power, but with weight. Not political weight. Personal. He had nothing. Traoré said quietly, referring to Celine. And yet when I asked him what he dreamed of, he said, to help you fix our village. Candace's lips parted. No words came. I told him to wait for me. Traoré added, barely above a whisper. I said I'd return with help. He paused. Then came the line that sliced through every wall left standing. But malaria doesn't wait. Candace closed her eyes, a sharp breath escaping. She wasn't crying for the camera. The camera just happened to be there. I'm so sorry, she whispered. But Traoré shook his head. It's not pity I want. It's memory. That word lingered, hung in the air like smoke. Memory. A boy gone. A drawing faded. A promise broken. I lead a country full of promises made and broken, he said, voice steady but hollow. Every time I speak, I ask myself, will this be another one? Candace looked at him, not with challenge, but with something closer to surrender. Her next question wasn't rehearsed. So what do you need to keep your next promise? The question was raw, vulnerable. Traoré looked straight into the camera. For the first time, he wasn't speaking to Candace. He was speaking to all of us. Not money, not aid, he said. Just the world's ears. And a little bit of heart. Silence. In the control room, no one dared speak. One producer slowly lowered his headset. Another wiped her eyes. They weren't watching a segment anymore. They were witnessing a reckoning. The broadcast ended. But no one moved. Not for a while. Candace stayed seated, staring at the spot where Traoré had held up the drawing. The control room director finally whispered, this is bigger than politics. And he was right. Hours later, Candace sat in her dressing room. The lights off. Her phone buzzed. It was her father. I watched. He said, I've never seen you like that. She didn't respond. I continued. He didn't shame you. Candace, he reminded you. Her eyes welled up again. I thought I was going to challenge him, she said softly. But he brought something out of me. She looked down at her phone, at the photo of the drawing, and she knew this couldn't end as just a clip. It had to become something more. The next morning, without alerting her team or the press, Candace Owens made a call. It wasn't to a producer. It wasn't to a politician. It was to a contact at a global education nonprofit. I want to fund a school, she said. There was a pause on the other end. Where Burkina Faso? She replied, a rural village. For who? Candace exhaled. For a boy named Celine. Her voice cracked slightly on the last syllable. No one on her team knew. No one needed to. This wasn't about media. This was about memory. By the time the clip of the interview hit 47 million views, it was already too late to control the narrative. Hashtags flooded the internet number. The promise number, Celine Lives number. Traoré truth across continents, from Ghana to Chicago. Paris to Johannesburg. People weren't arguing. They were reflecting. One woman posted a video through tears. I've never cried watching an interview. This broke me. But the most unexpected voice came from Candace herself. She posted a single image, the drawing. No caption, just a black heart. Silence spoke louder than commentary. Traoré was still in the U.S. I scheduled to speak at a private leadership event that evening. But plans shifted. Phones rang. Emails piled up. People weren't asking for political statements. They were asking for more of him. Back in his hotel room, Traoré ignored the calls. An envelope had been slid under his door. No name. No logo. Just one word in black, marker mercy. Inside was a handwritten letter. It read, Mr. President, I've hosted interviews with senators, presidents, even kings. I've debated all of them. But today, I wasn't debating. I was listening. You didn't argue. You reminded me that I still have a conscience, that I still have a heart. I cried in front of the world, and I don't regret it. Thank you for reminding me what leadership really looks like. C.O. He read the signature twice, folded the letter carefully, and for the first time in days, he smiled. He hadn't come to America to win a debate. He had come carrying a memory. And somehow, that memory was doing more than any speech ever could. That same day, in Ouagadougou, news of the viral interview reached the streets. Phones played the video on every corner. In a small home on the city's edge, an elderly woman saw her son's face on a screen. AWA. Celine's mother covered her mouth. That was his drawing. She whispered. He used to show it to strangers. And across a continent, across oceans, across timelines, a child long forgotten had become a symbol. A broken promise had become a spark. And what began as an interview was quietly becoming a movement. Candace Owens landed in Ouagadougou under a pale, dusty sky. No cameras. No entourage. Just her and a local fixer who spoke little English and even less French. But this wasn't about language. It was about finding something she couldn't explain. They drove for hours past tin-roofed markets. Barefoot children. Goats crossing cracked pavement. With every mile, the image of Celine's drawing replayed in her mind. The stick figures. The word, moi. And the promise that never came. Finally, the fixer pulled over on a dirt path near a cluster of mud brick homes. This is where they say the boy lived. Candace stepped out. Her boots hit the red earth with unfamiliar weight. The wind was dry. Her heart heavier. A woman in a faded blue dress sat outside, peeling mangoes with slow, practiced hands. Candace walked up carefully. AWA. The woman looked up. Candace swallowed. I'm looking for your son, Celine. Time stopped. Awa's knife slipped from her hand. Her eyes locked onto Candace's face, not in fear. Not in anger. But in disbelief. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. You knew my boy, she asked. Voice trembling. Candace's throat tightened. No, she whispered. But someone who loved him very much told the world his story. AWA stared at her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly and motioned toward a small doorway. Inside, the house was quiet. One wooden bench. One rusted fan. One faded photo on the wall. It was him. A boy with a wide smile and worn-out blue shirt. He wore that shirt every day. Awa said, touching the frame gently, even when it tore. Candace stared at the photo. Eyes burning, President Traoré said he promised to build a school. She murmured. AWA nodded. He came. He left. Then there was an attack in the region. We were moved. No one returned. Candace sat down. The wooden bench creaked under her. Then, without thinking, she pulled out her phone, opened her notes, and typed one sentence. The boy in the blue shirt must be remembered. She looked up. I don't want to just report this, she said. I want to help finish what he started. AWA placed her hand warm on Candace's. You came far. Daughter, she said quietly. Maybe this time, someone will keep the promise. Candace squeezed her hand back. She didn't have words, but something inside her cold, hardened, guarded for years, finally cracked. That night, back in her guest house, she found an envelope under the door. No name, no stamp, just handwriting that read, for the one who asked about the boy. Inside was a letter. Old, ink faded, addressed to my little brother, Saleen. Signed Ibrahim. Candace read every word, and by the end, she was shaking. This wasn't news. It was grief, legacy, truth. And now, it was hers to carry too. The next morning, Candace Owens arranged one final interview. No studio, no makeup, no headlines, just a quiet courtyard behind the presidential residence, and 2 chairs facing the morning sun. Ibrahim Traoré agreed. Under one condition: no politics, just honesty. When he stepped into the courtyard, there were no guards, just him and her. Candace reached into her bag and held out the letter she'd found in Awa's village. I found this, she said softly. Traoré stared at the envelope for a long moment. His fingers trembled slightly as he took it. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. I thought it was lost, he said. I wrote it years ago. I never sent it. Candace hesitated. I didn't know presidents wrote letters like that. He gave a sad smile. We do. We just don't send them. She looked him in the eye. Why didn't you ever talk about Saleen before his answer came low? Barely audible. Because it hurt. And because I was afraid people would think I was weak. Candace shook her head. No, she said. This is the strongest thing I've ever seen. There was silence. Not awkward. Not scripted. Just human. Then Traoré leaned back, looked at the rising sun, and spoke again. Maybe it's time to build the school, he said. Not as a promise, but as a beginning. Candace nodded. I'll help. That was all they said. And somehow, it was enough. Later that afternoon, Candace stood in a dusty field where Saleen once walked. She went live, not from a sleek studio, but from the soil that held the boy's memory. Behind her stood a wooden sign. Freshly painted Saleen Foundation, education for every child. Candace looked into the camera. Voice shaking, but firm. Sometimes, we chase headlines and ratings. But today, I'm not here as a commentator. I'm here as a witness. She paused. I met a mother who still speaks to her son in her dreams. I met a president who wrote a letter no one was meant to see. And I found a boy who changed everything. Her voice cracked. You've seen the clips. You've seen me cry. But now I ask you, don't let this be a moment. Let it be a movement. The live stream cut to children laughing barefoot in the dust, drawing alphabets in the dirt. Donations poured in. Comments exploded. And for the first time in her career, Candace Owens wasn't trending because of what she said, but because of what she felt. It wasn't about left or right anymore. It was about right and wrong. And it was just the beginning. 4 days after the broadcast, Candace Owens returned to the site. No fanfare. No reporters. Just her. The school hadn't been built yet, but the land no longer felt empty. Children were already there. Barefoot. Laughing. Tracing letters into the dirt with sticks. They didn't know why the cameras had come. They just knew someone was finally watching. From a distance, President Ibrahim Traoré arrived quietly. No speech. No security detail. No press. Just a leader and a promise he hadn't let die. He crouched beside a boy, writing the word hope into the soil. "Do you know who Celine was?" Traoré asked. The child shook his head. "He was a boy like you. Brave. Smart. But the world forgot him. That's why we're here now, to build something better." Candace watched it all from behind the lens. She had seen leaders talk about the future. But here was one building it with his own hands. Traoré reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden nameplate. The edges were worn. The carving was faded. It read Celine's class. He pressed it gently into the dirt. Candace blinked, realizing it wasn't made recently. It had been carved years ago, when the promise was still just a dream. She wiped her eyes and whispered, "This is what truth looks like." That evening, the internet exploded again. But something strange happened. No one argued in the comments. There were no angry threads. No hashtags twisted into slogans. Just stillness. Pain. Gratitude. One user wrote, "For once, I saw a leader act like a father, not a king, and it healed something in me." Another, "I'm naming my first child Celine." People from every background left. Right. American. African found themselves united, not by policy, but by pain, and by the shared hope that maybe, just maybe, this world could still remember the forgotten. That night, Traoré received a video call. It was Awa. Her eyes were wrinkled with age, but bright with something stronger than time. "I saw the sign," she said. "You kept your word." Ibrahim. His voice caught in his throat. "I tried," he said softly. "I'm still trying." Ava smiled. "That's all we ever asked. That someone try." The screen went dark, but the light didn't fade. 1 week later, Candace Owens sat in her home studio. No lights. No glam. Just her and a camera. She pressed record. This wasn't supposed to happen. She began. It was just another interview. But something broke through. She held up the wooden nameplate. President Traoré didn't just speak truth. He lived it. And it changed me. She took a deep breath. If this story touched you, don't just scroll past. Leave a comment for Celine. Share this. And help us carry this further than politics ever could. She leaned in. Let's not let this be the end. Let's make it the beginning. And with that, she clicked end broadcast. But the world was just getting started.